Wow, if you listened to the podcast last week, you would have heard me say that week 3 was moving week. And I know that's a popular thing that's said sometimes. There's multiple moving weeks kind of in a season from, in my opinion, but there's always that one big week in the year. I don't think that was week 3, but I think that was moving week numero uno. Lot of results, a lot of things to talk about there. Narratives being shattered, glass ceilings being broken. So let's just jump right in because there is a full show today. Week 3, let's get into it. Gonna kick things off today in the state of Georgia, not with Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs. They were in Tennessee this past weekend, but with Brent Key in the Yellow Jackets because, boy, they hosted Clemson over this weekend, and man, did the Tigers find themselves in a nest of Yellow Jackets. Final, Georgia Tech 24, Clemson 21, 55-yard fire drill field goal to win the game. Just ice in the veins. How did this happen? And now I say that like it's some monumental upset. I picked Georgia Tech to win this game, so I saw this coming, and a lot of you should have too. But how did this happen? Well, Haynes King is the grittiest player on the field of any given football game, more or less. But this game especially, Haynes King, 20 of 28, 211 yards passing, 25 carries for 103 yards rushing. He also accounted for a touchdown. That's just insane stuff. Insane stuff. Like I said, ice in the vein, balls of steel from Haynes King there. Clemson also had 2 turnovers, and they lost the time of possession battle in this game. But still, credit, to that Georgia Tech team, credit to Haynes King because they absolutely dominated Clemson, and Clemson needed things to happen for them to stay in this game. They needed breaks for them to stay in this game. Georgia Tech was just outplaying them. This game was a close game, little bit farther away than the score indicates, but overall, just a big win for Georgia Tech. Honestly, Clemson played kind of Georgia Tech style of ball a little bit. It just not as well. They also had 10 more yards of penalties, but they tried to run Cade Klubnik some. They tried to put more on his shoulders, because their run game, as far as the running backs are concerned, but just overall is not really keeping up well. The receiver core missing Antonio Williams, showing up here big still in another week. But this was a potential upset that I kind of circled in the offseason, and it became more and more apparent, more and more likely after watching the first couple of weeks that this is probably going to happen, that Georgia Tech is going to win this football game. And just in the offseason, it was like, hey, I think Clemson's going to be really good, but I think Georgia Tech is going to be pretty dang good too. And that's going to be, after LSU, that's going to be Clemson's, next biggest test. But, not really taking a lot away from them after LSU. A lot of concern after that Troy performance. And then it was kind of clear to me after that they're struggling in some key areas on their team. And that Georgia Tech was probably just going to take, this one home. Big moment for Georgia Tech. They've been trending this direction for a while now under Brent Key. I think I heard the stat like 7 of 8 of the last ranked conference opponents that they've played, they've beaten. So not surprising that they take this, this one home, but they'll start to get more respect nationally. They've had it from me for the past year and a half because I've seen, a year and a half ago probably when they beat Miami, even though they took advantage of some mistakes that Miami made. You have to put yourself in position to take, advantage of those mistakes, but they did, and they beat Miami. It was a couple years ago. I think it was that game where Miami, all they needed to do was kneel, and instead they hand the ball off, and they fumble, and Georgia Tech, recovers, and they got on the field and scored a win. That was probably when, they first kind of popped on my radar as, like, the next kind of team to arrive, for lack of a better term. But anyways, they're here. Looking forward for Clemson. This year was supposed to be your window, and you'll be leaving September with 2 losses at least. One of them is out of conference, so that's good, I guess. Obviously Georgia Tech in conference. The offense just has no answers thus far. You got Syracuse coming up. I think, I don't want to go so far as to say that I'm worried about you losing that one, but, I could see kind of an elevated performance from Syracuse, and if you just if Clemson just trips over, your feet all day, then that could be an upset. But after Syracuse, you've got a trip to North Carolina, which who knows what that'll look like. A trip to Boston College, who seems to have fallen off a bit. You got SMU, you got Duke, Florida State. That's going to be a tough one. Right now, I'd pick Florida State at Louisville. It's going to be a tough one. Furman, you'll win that, and at South Carolina. No telling what they're going to look like at the end of the year because that team is so bipolar. But if you had to play them tomorrow, I'd pick U. So there is that. But there's at least one or two more losses on this schedule for Clemson, and I just don't think they can afford that. Outside of pure chaos in the ACC, they're going to have to, their destiny is still in their hands, but it's a little out of their control too, because if you have, Florida State and Miami sweep their schedule, then you already have one conference loss. If Georgia Tech doesn't lose a game in conference, and they've got the head-to-head over, it's not looking good at this moment in time for Clemson. A lot of football left to be played. A lot of things, kind of have to go everyone's way, but you're not out of it yet. But it's not looking good at this time. For Georgia Tech, contending for the ACC is a realistic goal here. Your remaining opponents, you've got Temple, got at Wake Forest, got Virginia Tech, who just fired their coach. You got a trip to Duke. You also play Syracuse. You go to NC State, to Boston College. You get to play Pitt, and then you have Georgia, but obviously out of conference there. So the biggest question for me around Georgia Tech is going to be, can you keep Haynes King healthy to last you all season long and win you the games that you need to win? Because Haynes King can't go out and account for over 300 yards every week and just put his life on the line every week. You're going to have to but you're going to have to beat Temple without Haynes King running the ball more than a couple times. Same thing for, a team like maybe Wake Forest, maybe Virginia Tech. Like, you're going to have to find ways to win that doesn't involve Haynes King carrying the team on his shoulders. And not that he can't do that when he needs to, but you've got to limit his need to do that, is what I'm saying. Because eventually he's probably going to get hurt. He already missed the game week 2. So because he got hurt in week 1 playing, because he's putting the team on his shoulders. So you have to find a way to be more balanced. But, outside of that, he is putting on a hell of a performance each time he steps onto the football field. I'm excited to see what Georgia Tech has in store for the rest of the season. Talk about a game going not at all as I expected it to. Georgia went into Neyland Stadium and somehow managed to come out with a win on Saturday. The final was Georgia 44, Tennessee 41 from overtime. And this game, I'm not for the whole, Tennessee should have won or the losing team should have won or whatever. If you should have won, you would have won. I know that there's always exceptions to that rule. Same thing for penalties. It's like there's no game that's ever been played has been, officiated flawlessly, especially if it's SEC or ACC referees, then that you're going to have a terribly called game, from an officiating standpoint. But, Tennessee did miss a field goal from, what was that? It was a 43-yard game-winning field goal. They missed it, with seconds expiring. I think there was 2 seconds left on the clock, so it would have been a walk-off field goal. He just flat out missed it. They go and they lose in overtime. But regardless, we know that. Let's get into this game. So like I said, this game did not go how I thought it would because it was 44-41. This game was 21-7 after the first quarter, with Tennessee winning by 2 touchdowns. Joey Aguilar and the Tennessee offense are just menaces and Josh Heupel, the fact that he was able to essentially trade quarterbacks with UCLA just middle of the year in April, sometime in the spring, and come out here and have just a gunslinger ready to go is a little insane. But both of these teams showed a lot at the quarterback position because there were definitely some questions going in for both teams in their quarterback position. Obviously, like I said, Tennessee, because of the way that Joey Aguilar got there in the spring portal and the way all that all went down. Tennessee was expected to have a transition year or take a step back, and they were going to, it was up in the air about whether they were going to be okay with that or not. But no one expected them to win more than 7 or 8 games because everyone assumed you can't just, even if you pluck a quarterback out of the portal that's a high-rated 5-star quarterback and plug him and play him in your offense, that fall, how well is he going to do, even if he's a highly rated, recruit or a highly rated quarterback? So to do that with Joey Aguilar and have him be performing at this high of a level this quickly, whenever you're replacing a former 5-star recruit, it's just, like I said, it's insane stuff. But Georgia also had a lot of questions about Gunnar Stockton. We knew he was a gamer. We just didn't know kind of what his ceiling was from, throwing the ball standpoint. But anyways, first quarter there was 315 combined yards with the two teams, 28 total points. Obviously, like I said, Tennessee led 21-7. The game ended with a combined 998 yards of offense and 85 points. That's not how I thought a game between Georgia and Tennessee, who have Georgia mainly, but Tennessee too, the last couple of years have just been, defense is the name of the game for those teams the last several years. And for them to come out and hang 40 on each other is just not what I expected. Just a complete shootout. I was fully prepared to watch Georgia sit there and play a, slow, controlled game with, not putting too much on Gunnar Stockton. But Tennessee came out lighting it up through the air, and Gunnar had to respond. The Bulldogs had to respond. And by respond, I mean throw it all over the place themselves. And he did that obviously well enough to win the football game. But Georgia won. So, like I said, Tennessee won this game until they missed that 43-yard field goal. Georgia wins in overtime, obviously. The good thing, like I said, Gunnar Stockton's good enough to win a shootout. I think we already know Georgia's good enough to win, a ground and pound type of game, a gritty type of game. And obviously Gunnar can also run. Nate Frazier had a pretty decent game on the ground, 14 carries for 73 yards at Georgia. They were, I think, the 15th worst team in the SEC, a league of 16 last year running the ball. So it was good to see them kind of pick that up again. 198 total on the ground as a team. They held Tennessee to 125 rushing. Overall, the Bulldogs showed why they shouldn't be doubted, I think. Well prepared, resilient, patient enough, to let the bounces go their way and win football games. And that's been their MO for the last several years, more or less, I guess you could say. But that's just a well-coached Kirby Smart team, and they're back for yet another year of probably 10 wins. They go into a bye week this week, and then they host Alabama the next. So big game coming up for the Bulldogs. But as far as Tennessee goes, just a heartbreaker. I mean, a lot of people thought, if you have seen any of the videos circulating on like Twitter, wherever, a lot of people thought that kick went through because it was, depending on your angle, may have looked closer than it was. But a lot of people thought that kick went through. And so there was initially a lot of cheers that rang out through the stadium. And then they realized, oh, no, we're going to overtime with, and that's not what you want to do. But so big heartbreaker there. Looks like you won't miss a beat, like I said, after replacing Nico. Still not fully sure what, that ceiling is, as the season kind of, as you hit your stride and as things go, are you able, obviously you can win. Well, not that you won, but obviously you're capable of keeping up or leading a shootout type of game. Can you win on, kind of ground and pound style of play? I think we'll probably have to at some point. But you need to be better than you were rushing on Saturday. Defense obviously needs to play a little bit better. Same thing with Georgia. Coaching staff needs to, close out games there at Tennessee. But your remaining opponents there at Tennessee, you got UAB at Mississippi State. Then you hit a bye week. Then you play Arkansas on October 11th, it looks like. And then you have a game at Alabama. So some big games coming up, but they'll probably go off the radar for a little bit. But I expect, Tennessee to be in position to compete for the playoff come November. I think November 1st, we're going to be sitting there looking at who's going to make the playoff, and Tennessee's probably going to be a team that's right up there in that conversation, right on the fringe that, they'll have to win their November slate to make it in. But I expect them to be in contention come November. Top 25, not the AP, but the CP poll, or the Campus Pigskin poll here. So I'll eviscerate the AP poll a little later on because it's a pathetic excuse that's not worth any time, but it is kind of fun to poke at too because it's so easy and obvious. But I'm going to go through our top 25 rankings and give a brief explanation as to why I have teams where they are. So let's start. Should I start from the number 1 spot or the number 25 spot? Let's flip a coin. Should we flip a coin? Let's ask Siri. Say, hey Siri, flip a coin. Heads 25. Oh, heads. All right, we'll start at 25. All right, the 25th ranked team in the CP poll, Tulane. You've got 2 out of conference Power 4 wins against Northwestern and Duke, and you also beat South Alabama, which is a team that should not be overlooked. So I think you're kind of on the upswing. You'll have an opportunity this week against an SEC team in Ole Miss. So Tulane, I got you at number 25. Mississippi State, good win this season so far. You beat, I think, number 12 at the time, Arizona State, last year's Big 12 champion. You beat them, obviously, a couple weeks ago. So got Mississippi State at 24. Houston, you've handled your business. You got a conference win over Colorado. You've looked pretty good doing it. I think you're kind of starting to form into a Big 12 contender. So I've got you at the 23rd spot. Ole Miss, 2 conference wins already at Kentucky and Arkansas. Still obviously early to, not sure where those teams are going to wind up yet, but not looking good for those 2 teams. But regardless, they were fights to the end for Ole Miss. So got you there at 22, and you're playing Tulane this week. So like I said, Utah handled business. You beat Big Ten out of conference, so you've looked really good doing it. Looks like you're, recovering after last season. Number 20, I've got Texas at number 20, the Longhorns. You had a close loss to Ohio State, although, like I said, that game was a lot farther apart than the score would have you indicate. And you have a pretty good defense, but you've dropped a lot from where you were preseason because, preseason projections, expectations, the divorce was finalized through that. So what have you done to be top 10? You lost to your one good opponent, and Arch Manning has struggled to throw the forward pass each week since then. So not showing a lot offensively, but the defense has been good. But you should be good against UTEP and San Jose State. So Texas, you're 20. Honestly, lucky to still be ranked, in my opinion, but got you at 20. USC, you've dominated your cupcakes. You've beaten Purdue soundly, so got your first conference win out of the way there. Bama, good win over Wisconsin in the out of conference. Got you at number 18. USF, got you at number 17. You got, just skull drugged by Miami on Saturday, but you do have 2 top 25 wins in Boise and Florida. And don't come at me with the whole, they don't have any top 25 wins, those teams aren't ranked. They were ranked when you played them, and they're not ranked now because you beat them. So USF got you at number 17. Penn State, this is probably the most suspect team in my rankings, but you are number 16. Handled your business, but it was against nobody, not even teams worth mentioning. Tennessee, number 15 in the country. You've destroyed, Syracuse, obviously. You nearly beat Georgia. If it wasn't for a missed field goal, you'd probably be in the top 8 right now. But right now you're at 15. Missouri, you won the border war. You beat the Cajuns, who are a pretty good team. You've played really good, consistent football, so Missouri got you at 14. Number 13, Texas Tech. Lethal offense. Your best win's probably against Oregon State right now, but you've played really well so far. Really looking forward to the matchup against Utah coming up. That'll tell us a lot. Vanderbilt, welcome Vanderbilt to the party. Top 15 coming in at number 12 for Vanderbilt. Pure assault on your opponents that you've played so far. Virginia Tech and South Carolina, the most notable. Just assault. Just sketchy stuff being done whenever Vanderbilt comes into a stadium. Illinois got you at 11. Dominated your opponents. Duke's probably your best win right now. Have high expectations this week about, your game against Indiana. Georgia Tech, number 10. You beat Clemson at home, obviously. Colorado on the road. 3-0 start. Great look to Georgia Tech so far. Iowa State, you've beaten Kansas State, who, isn't doing too hot right now, but you've also beat Iowa. So really good start for Iowa State this year, coming in at number 9. Texas A&M went on the road. You beat Notre Dame on Saturday, obviously. Probably one of the best wins in the country thus far. Not the best, but one of the best. Georgia's win over, Tennessee and Neyland is pretty impressive, but A&M, one of the best ones in the country. You're number 8. Oklahoma, great win over Michigan. John Mateer's done really well so far, fitting into that, to that team there in Oklahoma. Oregon, number 6, you've got wins over Oklahoma State and Northwestern, both in conference and out of conference. So not a great resume so far, but you've done really well. You've beaten the teams just into oblivion. Florida State, you've beaten Alabama, looked good doing it. You've absolutely dominated your other opponents, so you're coming in at number 5. LSU, number 4, win at Clemson, obviously, in your first conference win over Florida. I'd say as far as teams in my top 25 outside of Penn State, LSU, I'm starting to feel skeptical about, but right now I've still got number 4. Miami, number 3. 2 top 25 wins, and you looked great doing it. Obviously, you beat Notre Dame. You beat USF, who is a team to not be overlooked. So, number 3, Miami. Georgia, that road win at Tennessee, obviously very tough place to play. You can win multiple ways. Just another dynamic team that Georgia's putting on the field this year. And Ohio State still have you at number 1, obviously beating Texas. Dominant defense, talented offense that I think will kind of, form into, what they're going to ultimately be. I think, they've had a rocky road the last couple of weeks, but I think they'll just get better and better. So at this point, we're completely divorced from preseason expectations. Everything's based purely off resume and how you've played. I don't know why the AP can't do this. It's really not that hard. You know what? It's because they don't watch the games. Like I said, we're going to have a little roast of the AP poll this week because it's just pathetic. So, as we found out last week, some of these voters we know that some of them don't watch the games, but apparently they, don't even look at the scores either. That one lady who didn't watch the Florida USF game, didn't even bother to look at the score, didn't know who won, and just ranked Florida higher than she did the week prior whenever Florida lost. Like, just pathetic, non-professional, lazy stuff from these voters. But I just want to ask you, why is Notre Dame ranked in the AP poll this week? They're 0-2. It's the first time an 0-2 team has been ranked since like 88 or something, like 1988. So why are they ranked? I'll tell you why in a second. USF, who has 2 wins over top 25 teams, isn't ranked. You know the other team that has 2 wins over top 25 teams? Miami. You know where they're ranked in the AP? I think 4th, but USF, not them. Texas, who lost to Ohio State, not dinging you up too bad for that one, but you've shown no ability to be a serious threat otherwise, but you're in the top 10 somehow. Whenever your quarterback can barely throw the forward pass and you've lost your only good game, you're still top 10. I'm not saying that, I've got them 20th, so I'm not saying that they should be unranked, but they're not top 10, at least not at this moment in time. The AP is supposed to be a ranking based on your resume at this particular moment in time. That's why they update it weekly. So what are we doing there? And why is Indiana ranked? They were overrated last year all season because they played a cupcake schedule, and so they just threw them in the top 25 this year. They've played Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State, but somehow they're a top 25 team. And USF, who has 2 top 25 wins, isn't. Indiana hasn't even played a Power 4 opponent yet, and they're in the top 25, but USF, we can't put them in there. Just nonsense stuff. Michigan, again, I don't have Michigan ranked, because for the same reason that I have Texas at 20th. They've lost to their one good opponent. They've beaten their cupcakes, and they've struggled. They haven't beaten the Power 4 team yet. Maybe they'll have a better resume later on, but right now they don't have one that warrants a top 25 ranking. Penn State at 2. I've got Penn State ranked 16th. I don't think they should be unranked, but ranking them at number 2 is silly. Like Indiana, they have not played a Power 4 opponent yet, but somehow they're the number 2 team in the country. Georgia Tech isn't even top 15. LSU was ranked number 3 in the country based off of that week 1 win against Clemson. And then Georgia Tech goes out and beats Clemson, and they can't even crack the top 15. And by the way, Clemson has a better resume than Notre Dame because they at least have a win on their schedule against Troy, which is better than any win that Notre Dame has yet. But Notre Dame is sitting there fat and happy in the top 25, and Clemson's not, which I don't think Clemson should be ranked, by the way, but they got a better resume right now than Notre Dame does. So the reason, like I said, I'll tell you, that Notre Dame, for example, is ranked, it's all about brand bias and recognition. This is the thing that people complain about all through college football, about brand bias in the media. This is brand bias in its most apparent and obvious form. A team that's won 0 games so far, and you've got them ranked top 25, and then you've got a team like USF who has 2 top 25 wins, and you don't think that they're worthy? I mean, you got Vanderbilt at 20. Has Vanderbilt just walked into South Carolina in Williams-Brice Stadium, one of the toughest places to play in the country, and pantsed South Carolina and made fun of their tiny peepee in front of all of their home fans. And they absolutely trounced Virginia Tech on the road earlier. They've got they've got 2 great road wins already, and they are barely in the top 25. Like, just nonsense, unserious, lazy voting, lazy reporting from people who have no idea what they're doing. The AP poll is a joke, and the coaches poll isn't any better. It's equal in its form of being a joke. They just hand off their votes to the closest intern because they don't care or want to deal with it, because they know it's nonsense. This stuff doesn't matter. It's nonsense. And if you think for a second that they're not going to try and put like Notre Dame at 9-3 or 10-2 in the playoff whenever there's more deserving teams potentially later on, then you're lying to yourself, because this right now is showing you that the brand bias is in full swing, with them sitting there in the top 25 having 0 wins on the season. Listen to the C people, not the A people. Anyone who is still listening, I don't know, if you listen regularly and you're still listening, then I do want to say I am beaten up today. I've got just stomach stuff going on, cramps. I just feel sick, but I'm pushing my way through because we have exciting games like Texas A&M at Notre Dame to talk about. Final of this game, Texas A&M 41, Notre Dame 40. I knew it on that botched snap for that extra point. You leave the door open like that for a team like A&M. Yeah, recently I wouldn't have had faith for them to, punish you for it. But this early in the season, the talented team, high expectations, good coaching staff, you leave the door open like that, you had to pay for it. This game had a little bit of everything, but a great game all around. And miss me with all of that missed holding call bullshit that everyone wants to talk about on this game. Like I said earlier, there's no game out there that's officiated evenly or perfectly. I mean, there's typically, over the flow of a game, any missed calls or bad calls tend to kind of even out. The Kings kind of work themselves out. At the end of the day, teams have to be good enough to put themselves in position to win. And if you are good enough to do that, you typically will overcome that stuff, fair or not. There are certain scenarios and circumstances where officials just flat out screw a team out of a win. It happened last year in that South Carolina LSU game, but this game is not one of those examples. Both of these teams were fairly evenly matched. For example, that holding call that they called on A&M, that phantom hold, the hold that was not a hold at all, where your defender tripped and they called it a hold, that resulted in a blocked punt because you got backed up and a touchdown. This play wouldn't even have been necessary had they made the right call then. So they made the wrong holding call on the first drive. They missed one on the last drive. It evens out. So miss me with the holding call BS. There's plenty of other calls in this game that got missed. There's a kickoff return that got called back before this drive. So you don't want, if you would have stopped them, they trotted all the way down the field to win that game. And if you could have stopped them, this wouldn't have been a problem. So miss me with it. But like I said, blocked punt for a touchdown. Notre Dame started hot doing that. Kickoff return that was called back, like I said. That holding call that called that one back was a bit questionable. Each team had an interception. There was good defensive stops. There was exciting offensive drives. Just a great game. One team would, score. The other team would respond. Just fun watch. Notre Dame, they won the time of possession battle. A&M, had more total yards and yards per play, for both rushing and passing. Notre Dame, I counted 12 total explosive plays. For A&M, I counted 9, 8 explosive pass plays, 2 explosive runs. So Notre Dame beat A&M on the explosive play count, but A&M still found a way to win this game. Like I said, turnovers, Notre Dame, you had 1 interception, you had 1 turnover on downs, and you also had 1 fumble/turnover on downs. It was a 4th down play. running back gets hit in the backfield and fumbles. A&M recovers, but it was going to be a turnover either way. But so that's how that happened. A&M, one interception, like I said, 1-for-1 on fourth down. That blocked punt by Notre Dame. That I did not think after that happened. I was like, boy, this is going to be a long day for the Aggies. But both QBs were similarly efficient. But like I said last week, teams were fairly evenly matched. I gave the edge to A&M because of Marcel Reed, but I still did pick Notre Dame to win. But that's kind of how it played out. Marcel Reed just was, better situationally when it called for it. Made some plays with his legs. But it was the second week in a row that Marcel Reed had to leave the game after a big hit. So going to keep an eye on that in the coming weeks. Overall, massive win for the Aggies. Can we say that they've arrived yet? I don't think so. I think they just popped a big win, but it does answer some questions about that team and answer some questions about that coaching staff. Culturally, they look like they're coming along very well. That was a very resilient team. They had to overcome a lot to win that football game, especially on the road at night. Still a little questionable about the defense, but they did play pretty well. They did stop the run pretty well. I'm not questioning Georgia's defense, and they just let Tennessee give 40 or 41 up on them. They just let them do that. So I can't question A&M's too much whenever they're kind of in the same shootout scenario. The game just changes whenever stuff like that happens. So still some questions for me about the defense for the Aggies, but not panicking yet. They start 3-0 with that big win against Notre Dame on the road, and they roll into their bye week this week, sitting fat and happy. Going to prepare for Auburn 2 weeks from now, hosting them at Kyle Field. Then you got Mississippi State and Florida at home. So 3 straight home games coming up. Then you go on the road to Arkansas, and then you've got a road trip to LSU coming up. So big meaty part of the schedule, this big stretch coming up after this bye week. After that LSU game, you do have another bye week before you take a road trip to Missouri, host South Carolina. You get Samford at home, a tune-up game before you go on the road to play Texas at the end of the year. Notre Dame, on the other hand, it's a tough loss. You start the season 0-2 against your best opponents. So obviously, I'm not breaking any news here. I'm not thinking outside of the box whenever I'm saying this because it's the most popular take right now. But is Notre Dame going to be able to make the playoff even at 10-2? I don't know. It depends on what happens around the country and for the rest of the year. If we get to the end of the season and we kind of are like we were last year, where there's a bunch of 10-2 teams and there's enough of them to fill up that 12-team playoff, I don't think Notre Dame should be let in, because they lost to their 2 most capable opponents. If you look at the rest of their schedule, I mean, you've got Purdue, bleh. Then you go to Arkansas, who, they could give you a fight, but they're not a very good football team. Boise State, they don't look like they're going to be all that much this year. NC State, decent team, but is that win good enough to vault you into the top 12? I don't think so. USC, story still being written on you. Not really sure what they're going to be by the time you play them. Maybe they're ranked, maybe they're not. So then you get a bye. Then you finish out with Boston College, Navy, Pitt, Syracuse, and Stanford. You could go through the rest of the schedule if you're Notre Dame and not play a single ranked team. And even if you beat all of them, I don't think that you're deserving of going to the college football playoff. If your 2 ranked opponents, you brought home the L, and then you go and you beat 10 nonsense teams. I don't think that that's a good enough resume. But like I said, it does at the end of the day depend on, the chaos that happens around the rest of the country as the season plays out. So you could lose one more game, though. Like I said, this is all speculation. Obviously, circling that USC game, that's probably your biggest one. We'll see about the others. But anyways, great win for A&M. They want to call it a signature win for Mike Elko. I think that is the case because of the state of the program when he took it over, the fact that you hosted Notre Dame in week 1 last year and you had that result there, the fact that, you've been able to kind of flip the culture this, after that first year. You've seen them become a resilient team. You've seen them, kind of, I don't want to compare them to Georgia, but the way that, Georgia, they just have this resiliency about them. I'm not saying A&M's on that level. I'm just kind of saying that, there are some similarities in that. It's just overcoming obstacles and and coming back and getting a big win. Marcel Reed's a gamer, so like I said, big weekend for A&M fans. Enjoy it. Hit the bye week and come out hot and see what you can do against Auburn. I'm glad that we had that game for the night slate. Talking about A&M Notre Dame, I'm glad we had that fun game to watch because the other two games were just kind of gross. And that would be, for example, Florida at LSU. Gross. But LSU 20, Florida 10. Like I said, just a gross game to watch, especially if you're a Florida fan. Someone obviously, someone was going to win this game, but I don't leave this game feeling great about either team. Obviously, Florida, especially them, I don't feel good about them at all, but I don't feel all that great about LSU right now either. You won. It's better to win and correct your flaws than to lose and have to correct your flaws. But like I said, I don't feel great about you. That's 3 weeks in a row where you've struggled to score 20 points. And last week you played LA Tech. Still willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, though, but I do have some concerns there in Baton Rouge. I don't care how mad and irrational Brian Kelly acts. But Florida called just another atrocious game. I mean, it was pretty obvious that DJ Lagway was not just did not have it on Saturday. I mean, the dude could not stop throwing interceptions, but they just kept trying to put the ball in his hands and pass it around, and they were running the ball pretty well, but they never really tried to commit to the run game, or run the ball to win. So, and comparatively, I mean, I'm concerned about LSU's run game. I'm not a believer in the whole take this, run away, and they only did this because, that big run happened. But in this case, just for example, I mean, LSU, they had that 51-yard run at the end of the game, like a minute and 40 left in the fourth quarter. You take that away, and the team had a total of 51 yards on the ground, 21 carries for 51 yards. That's 2.4 per carry. That's not good. Their leading rusher, Caden Durham, with that long run, because he's the one that got it, he's 15 carries for 93, 6.2 yards. Looks good, right? But you take away that 51-yard run, he's down to 14 carries for 42 yards. It's 3 yards per carry. So, yeah, he broke out off that long run. Credit to him. But if you want to get a more clear picture of how the game played out, that's how it was playing out before that long run broke out and the waning moments of the fourth quarter. So they just are not good yet on the ground. And Brian Kelly, yeah, you can yip and yap about how you won the game and it's an SEC game, and yeah, credit to you. That's right, you won an SEC game. Congratulations. That doesn't mean that you don't have questions. That doesn't mean that you don't have things you can work on. If you're Brian Kelly and you really want to sit there and act like there's nothing that you can improve on coming out of this game, then I don't know what to tell you. You just must not be a very good coach. But there's clear deficiencies thus far into the season, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And if you can't acknowledge that without flipping out and having an aneurysm in your press conference, then I don't know what to tell you. He's not a very likable guy. But Nussmeier, 55% completion rating, 15 for 27, 220 with a touchdown and a pick. He still has that tendency to kind of have some bad interceptions, although not nearly as bad as Lagway. That third down, efficiency question that was the second question that set Brian Kelly off in his press conference. I mean, 28% on third down. Like, don't sit there and look at me. Like I said, you won the game, sure. Have your flowers, fine. But, I mean, have a little maturity and some emotional intelligence. Have, like, a little composure to you. You're the head coach of supposed to be a CEO style coach. Like, let's relax a little bit. 28% third down conversions, not good. If you're fine with that, then fine. Enjoy 7 and 5. But, didn't take away many positives other than you won and that the Florida defense is good. So I know I sound like I'm a big Brian Kelly hater in that, and typically I would say no, but I don't know, that the way that he reacted to that reporter in that postgame, just rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, go watch Billy Napier's postgame. A little bit different situation, obviously, but go watch Billy Napier's postgame. I mean, the vibes over there are just dreadful, and that dude is nothing but nice and respectful and buttoned up, even in a loss after disaster loss. I mean, he's not out there. He has every excuse in the world to not care and to not give any effort into his responses or the way that he talks to people. But he's out there, just pure class from Florida's head coach there, even though he may not make it through the next couple weeks as the head coach. Nothing but class. Wish I could say the same thing about Brian Kelly. All right, just some rapid fire takeaways from week 3. Vanderbilt beat South Carolina, as I'm sure we all know, and if you listen to this show, then you would have seen that one coming. 31-7, and yeah, I know Lenore Sellers went down, but there wasn't a lot of promising things coming from that offensive side of the ball prior to that. He's still a little questionable coming into this week against Missouri, by the way, but Vanderbilt just dominated South Carolina. I'm glad we can stop pretending that South Carolina is a good team, but I never did pretend to think that. I don't know why they were ever, ranked in the top 11. Actually, I do know why. It's because the AP voters are incompetent. But Vanderbilt is going to be a problem for every team they play this year. I'm not quite sure what their ceiling is yet, but I'm pretty confident that they're going to make a bowl game. I mean, they're already 3-0. They've got Georgia State and Utah State coming up, and I think they'll win those 2 games. That'll put them at 5-0. Then you get Alabama before a bye week if you're Vanderbilt. And let me ask you this. What are the odds that Vandy enters their bye week 6-0? That would include a win over Bama. Preseason, it would have sounded like I'm, being disingenuous or joking. Right now, I'm starting to think it's a legitimate question. Anyways, like I said, Lenore Sellers, he had a concussion, so status for the Missouri game is unclear. I'll monitor that as the week progresses. But Miami, they beat USF 49-12. The AP had the audacity to unrank USF after this. So I guess, does that mean that Miami doesn't have a ranked win anymore, guys? Or does that rule only apply to USF? Just wondering. So it doesn't change my opinion on USF at all. I think that was about, what I expected. They're still a very good team. Miami, though, is proving that they're legit. This could have been a letdown spot or just an ugly game, especially with that long weather delay. But they, did not let that be the case. They dominated USF. This game got a little bit lost, though. It was scheduled for like 3 o'clock. But like I said, that weather delay really kind of pushed the start, the bulk of that game back into that 6 p.m. window. And we had, some other big games that came on at that time. So kind of got lost in the mix there. But Miami did have a good win there. Ole Miss beat Arkansas 41-35. Just kind of confirmed what I thought about both teams. Arkansas's fight, but, probably upset somebody, but overall not very good. Ole Miss doesn't really feel like there's a lot of meat on the bone there yet. I may be wrong, but it just kind of feels like, they're fine so far. They're not great, I would say. They've, had some good flashes, but I think overall I'm just still kind of questioning what their ceiling is. Other than that, Bama, obviously they beat Wisconsin 38-14. Doesn't really change my opinion about either team. That was kind of the result I expected. Bama does have an opportunity against Georgia coming up in 2 weeks. I'll kind of change, shape my opinion around Alabama depending on how that goes. And, just kind of a 50,000 foot view of college football. If you want to look at the SEC, who's in tier 1 right now? It just kind of feels like there's a lot of teams that are crowding tier 2. I think maybe from what we've seen so far, we may see 2 or 3 teams break through, but I'm not quite sure who yet, especially because Texas is just a big question mark of confusion right now. I don't know what's going on with Arch Manning. Some people have speculated that he's hurt. I've seen the videos of him wincing or grimacing, whatever, whenever he's out there throwing the ball, not whenever he's pooping, like Steve Sarkisian said for some reason. But I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if he's got the yips. The yips, that's some pretty bad yips if it's just the yips, and as simple as that. 11 of 25 for 114 yards against UTEP. That's with 1 touchdown, 1 interception. That's just concerning. I think he got booed off the field there too. So there is that. Overall in the season, 579 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 picks. So not really what we were expecting there from Arch Manning. If you listen to the national media, if you listen to this show, then you would have pumped your brakes like I did. As far as the ACC goes, obviously Clemson's kind of fading. Miami and Florida State, Georgia Tech look like the teams to beat there. Not a whole lot of meat on the bone throughout the rest of the conference at this moment in time. But the Big 12 is, starting to ramp up. Got a good matchup this week between Texas Tech and Utah. Arizona State and Baylor also play. So the puzzle there in that conference is, starts to take a little bit better shape this week. Michigan and Nebraska, they have a game this week. So we'll finally get to see Nebraska after that, game from that win over Cincinnati. They've disappeared off the map since then because they've been playing Houston Christian. But this is obviously Michigan's first shot after that loss to Oklahoma. And Illinois, you get your shot at Indiana this week, to build your resume. I think you'll win that game. And we got the good old Washington State in-state rivalry there coming up. So great week of college football for week 3. Great week of college football for week 4 coming up. Make sure you leave a 5-star review, follow the podcast, like the video, or subscribe if you're on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Campus Pigskin or Instagram. I've tried to post over on Instagram a little more. So other than that, thank you for listening to this episode of the College Football Podcast.